these are places, Puerto Rico and Hawaii, and we didn't mention, we kind of mentioned Guam and Samoa and all of our other, colonized brothers, These places were self-sufficient. The Kingdom of Hawaii was rich, The same thing about India. Like, we think about India, that it's poor, but India was the richest country in the world, right? Richer than England, richer than anything. Puerto Rico's called Rich Port. That tells you what kind of place it was. And on both islands, they grew everything. They provided for themselves, and now they can't provide for themselves. And now there's all these problems. And now it's almost sad when you read about Hawaii in 1800s. It's so beautiful. It just sounds so beautiful, and the ecological diversity and the purity. Like, you'll never. You love Hawaii, but you can never even imagine what it was like before the missionaries came.
Yeah, and one of the things, even like the kingdom had a lot of problems. The Hawaiian, unfortunately, we were going through something of a population apocalypse with our population dropping. And amidst that crisis, we were able to not only establish a mandatory education. We were one of the most literate populations of the planet. Literacy was universal. At the time in the United States, at the same time, they still were, one, enslaving people, and two, they had maybe a 70% literacy rate. Today, the U.S. still has a lower literacy rate than the Hawaiian Kingdom did at the time. Not only that, the Hawaiian Kingdom had hundreds of newspapers. We had colored color print images newspapers before the United States did, and we had electricity in the White House our Palace before the White House.
That's right.
So when people come in and are like, America brought you civilization, they brought you education, they brought you wealth. We had that before them. We were richer then than we are now. And the Puerto Rico, it's the same thing. Yeah. These islands that are owned by the U.S., the constant lie that's told to us is we need America, we need America, we need America. And they come offering these like concessions to us that, well, you know what? We own you, but here, we'll give you this so that way you're okay. But what we know as like a universal rule as colonized people is when white men come to your shore and offer you something, it's a lie because they're afraid of you realizing what you can really have.
Right. I mean, it's you always think about like what would have happened if, the Puerto Ricans, as soon as they saw the first white ship coming, they say, nope, you can't get on. Yep. Those people the Hawaiians who killed James Cook, they were right. If they would have kept doing that, things would have been better. Yeah. I mean, same thing happened in Puerto Rico. The first, like after James Cook came, in the first century after he came, the Hawaiian population like decreased by like 60%, something like that.
Yep.
And same thing happened in Puerto Rico. Where's the independence movement now? Like, you guys are a state. Is there a chance you guys could become independent?
We have a saying in Hawaii, and it goes back to when they overthrew our country. This man, one of the Hawaiian independence organizers and activists and leaders, wrote in the newspaper. He gave a speech, and he said, "Ahiki ke aloha aina hope loa." Basically, it says. Basically, the phrase is until the last aloha aina. And aloha aina is a phrase we use that means love the land, but it also is descriptive of people, like loyalists to the land, people who, it's similar, like the idea of patriots, but different because it's not connected to it's connected to the land. It's a little bit different, but basically same idea. But ahiki ke aloha aina hope loa means until the last aloha aina. And basically the phrase was uttered saying that until the last Hawaiian is gone, the fight for independence goes on. So long as one of us lives, we have the chance. And so one of the things I've been telling a lot of Puerto Ricans who are very afraid of statehood is like, yes, you need to fight statehood as hard as you can, get independent. But if somehow statehood happens, because America seems to always find a way to make colonialism happen, the fight doesn't end there. Because so long as there are Puerto Ricans who believe in independence, the fight will still be there because the chance for decolonization doesn't end when they've incorporated you into their country. I mean, the British Empire did the same thing. They had all their territories and colonies, and the British Empire fell. And every empire in history has collapsed. And America's empire is no different because it's run by a military that overextends itself wildly and continues to profit off the suffering and the exploitation of its lower classes. And so long as that is the method of that empire to continue on, it'll inevitably fail forward and doom itself to extinction. And so in Hawaii, independence isn't just something that'll benefit us. It's a responsibility we have to get our liberation and independence because of the way the U.S. military utilizes us as a base for its imperialism in the Pacific. If Hawaii gets free, America has a much harder time holding Samoa. It has a much harder time holding Guam. It has a much harder time exploiting people in the Philippines and in Okinawa and in every other place around the Pacific and Asia. Hawaii, one of the things counseling is used for is a training area for the U.S. military and its allies. One of those allies is the Indonesian military, which is currently committing genocide in West Papua of Black Pacific Islanders. They're genociding this population. Indonesia is occupying them, and they're using Hawaiian land as a training ground for these genocidal troops. So independence for us isn't just yes, it is absolutely a better future for Hawaiians and everybody in Hawaii. It's a chance for us to determine our own future because our past was robbed from us by white colonizers. But also, it's this responsibility we have to get free, because our independence and liberation means a step toward liberation and independence and the reduction of imperialism being enacted upon our brothers and sisters across the Pacific and in other colonized places.